In the faraway land of Emberia, dragons once ruled the skies. But now, they are nearly extinct, forced to hide in human form to survive. Our heroine, Seraphina, belongs to the Solara clan, a rare breed of fire-breathing dragon shifters. She has flaming red hair, golden eyes, and the ability to transform into a majestic crimson dragon. But there is one problem. Seraphina is promised to Draven, the strongest warrior of her clan. A powerful but cruel dragon, Draven believes she belongs to him. Seraphina doesn't love him. She longs for freedom, adventure, and love beyond duty. One fateful night she escapes into the human world, unaware of the dangers waiting for her. The village of Eldermere. The village of Eldermere was nestled at the foot of the Cinderpeak Mountains, where the forests were thick with mist and the rivers ran deep with ancient magic. It was a quiet place, filled with merchants, blacksmiths, and farmers, humans who had no idea that dragons still walked among them. Seraphina pulled her hood lower, letting the fabric hide her flaming red hair. The scent of freshly baked bread and roasted meat filled the air as she walked through the bustling marketplace. She had to blend in. She had spent her life in hiding, running from dragon hunters, from her own people, from the fate they had forced upon her. But here, in this human village, she had a chance to be something more than a creature of legend. She just had to survive long enough. A hunter's gaze. From the shadows of a blacksmith's forge, Kai watched her. She moved differently from the other travelers, her steps too graceful, her presence too commanding. And then there were her eyes. Golden. Like the ancient ones. He clenched his jaw. He had seen eyes like those before, in the dragons he had hunted. Kai wasn't like the other hunters of his order. He didn't kill for sport. He studied dragons, tracked them, learned their secrets. And he carried one himself. The blood of dragons flowed through his veins, a curse and a gift he had never asked for. And now, something about this woman sent a shiver down his spine. He had to know who she was. A test of wits. Seraphina had barely reached the edge of the marketplace when a voice stopped her. "You're new here." She turned, her heart pounding. Kai stood before her, tall and composed, his dark hair tousled by the wind. His green eyes, sharp as a predator's, studied her carefully. "Perhaps," she said, forcing a polite smile. "You don't look like a traveler," he said, crossing his arms. Seraphina tilted her head. "And you don't look like a merchant." A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "Observant. Most people don't notice me. I notice everything." Kai's smile faded. "Then tell me, traveler, why do your eyes look like fire?" Seraphina's breath caught. He had noticed. She took a slow step back. "I don't know what you mean." "Liar," Kai said softly. She needed to leave. Now. But before she could turn, a group of mercenaries entered the square, their voices loud and boisterous. One of them, a man with a jagged scar across his cheek, paused, looking at Seraphina. "Well, well," he sneered. "What's a pretty thing like you doing here alone?" Kai's expression darkened. "Trouble." Seraphina tensed as the mercenary stepped closer, the stench of ale on his breath. "Not alone," Kai said coolly, stepping between them. "She's with me." The mercenary laughed. "That's so? What's she to you, hunter?" Kai's fingers twitched near his blade. Seraphina didn't give him a chance to answer. With fluid grace, she twisted her hand, and suddenly, the mercenary staggered backward, clutching his wrist. His dagger, once hidden, clattered to the ground. Kai raised an eyebrow. "Fast. Too fast." The mercenary cursed but didn't press further. He knew when he had lost. With a grunt, he turned and left. Kai turned back to Seraphina. "You're not a helpless traveler, are you?" Seraphina smirked. "Neither are you." For a moment, there was only silence between them. And then Kai smiled. "I think," he said, "we should talk." A dangerous truth. That night, Seraphina met Kai at the edge of the forest, beneath the glow of the silver moon. "You wanted to talk," she said. "So talk." Kai studied her, his fingers playing idly with the dragon pendant around his neck. A relic from his past. A reminder of the blood in his veins. "I know what you are," he said at last. Seraphina's heart stopped. She fought to keep her expression neutral. "And what do you think I am?" Kai stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Not human." The words hung in the air like an unspoken challenge. Seraphina clenched her fists. If he knew, he would have to kill her. That was the law of his kind. But then Kai did something she didn't expect. He removed the pendant from his neck and placed it in her hand. Seraphina felt a strange heat pulse from it. "This belonged to my mother," Kai said. "She was..." He hesitated. "Like you?" Seraphina's eyes widened. "You have dragon blood?" Kai gave a small, almost bitter smile. "I do." Seraphina swallowed. This changed everything. The hunter who should have been her enemy was like her. And for the first time, she wasn't alone. A choice to make. For days they met in secret. Kai told her of his past, of how his mother had hidden him from the hunters. How she had been killed when they found out. Seraphina told him of her own prison, of Draven, of the life she had fled. Their worlds were different, but their pain was the same. And somewhere between the secrets, the danger, and the nights beneath the stars, something changed. Seraphina looked at Kai not as a hunter, but as a man. Kai looked at Seraphina not as a dragon, but as a woman. But they both knew the truth. If the world found out, they would be hunted. If the hunters discovered Seraphina, she would die. And if Draven found her, it would mean war. Kai reached out, brushing his fingers against her cheek. "Run away with me," he whispered. Seraphina closed her eyes. She wanted to. More than anything. But war was coming. And no matter how much she loved him, she couldn't ignore the flames that burned in her veins. The betrayal. One night, the village bells rang. Dragon hunters had arrived. And they were looking for her. Seraphina turned to Kai, panic in her eyes. "You told them?" Kai's face was filled with horror. "No. I swear to you I didn't." But it was too late. The village was surrounded. And standing at the gates, his dark eyes burning with rage, was Draven. "You belong to me," he snarled. Seraphina would not go back. With a roar, her body erupted into flames, and before the stunned eyes of the hunters, she became the dragon once more. Kai unsheathed his blade, standing at her side. Because he knew now. She was not his enemy. She was his destiny. And together, they would fight for their freedom. A secret meeting. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the distant rumble of a waterfall. Seraphina moved swiftly through the trees, her cloak billowing behind her. She shouldn't be here. But she couldn't stay away. Kai was waiting for her beneath the ancient willow, a lone lantern casting flickering golden light over his face. When he saw her, he exhaled, relief washing over his features. "You came," he said softly. Seraphina hesitated before stepping closer. "I shouldn't have." Kai chuckled, running a hand through his dark hair. "And yet here you are." She crossed her arms. "If anyone finds us—" "I know," he interrupted. His voice was lower now, edged with something unreadable. "But I don't care." Seraphina's heart pounded. She had spent her whole life being told that humans were the enemy. That they could never understand what it meant to be Dragakind. But Kai did. She could see it in his eyes, the war within him, the fire in his veins. "Tell me about her," she whispered. Kai stiffened. "Who?" "Your mother," Seraphina said. "The dragon." For a moment he said nothing. Then, with a slow exhale, he sank onto a fallen log, staring into the flickering lantern. "My father was a hunter," he began. "A great one. He had killed more dragons than any man before him. But one day, he met one he couldn't kill." Seraphina lowered herself beside him, listening intently. "My mother wasn't like the others," Kai continued. "She was wild. Free. Untamed. She saw the world differently, Saw something in my father that no one else did. And he saw something in her too. Seraphina swallowed. Love. Kai nodded. Yes. But the world didn't understand. His voice turned bitter. They called him a traitor. A monster. When they found out, they made him watch as they burned her alive. A sharp pain twisted in Seraphina's chest. She reached for his hand instinctively, and to her surprise he didn't pull away. I promised myself I would never love a dragon, Kai whispered. Seraphina held her breath. And yet here we are. She could see it, the battle raging within him. The fear, the longing. The undeniable truth. If they were discovered, the same fate that had befallen his mother would claim her too. And yet, in this moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the warmth of his hand, the way his breath hitched as she leaned closer. She knew this was madness. But when Kai tilted his head and pressed his lips to hers, she let the madness consume her. Days passed, and Seraphina and Kai found themselves drawn together again and again. They stole moments beneath the moon, whispered conversations in the shadows. And for a time, it felt real. Like they were just two people, not a hunter and a dragon, not enemies bound by fate. One evening, Kai led her deep into the mountains, to a place only he knew. The hidden sanctuary? A cavern carved by time itself, with waterfalls that glowed blue beneath the moonlight and flowers that only bloomed in the dark. Seraphina turned in a slow circle, awestruck. It's beautiful. Kai smiled. I used to come here as a boy. When the world felt too heavy. Seraphina touched a vine curling around the stone. Why bring me here? He hesitated before answering. Because with you, it feels lighter. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the weight of the world disappeared. Kai stepped closer. I don't care what you are, Seraphina. She swallowed. You say that now. And I'll say it again. His voice was firm. You're not a monster. She turned away. You don't know what I've done. Kai reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. Then tell me. She closed her eyes. If he knew, would he still look at her this way? Could she risk it? The warmth of his touch told her yes. But the fire in her blood whispered no. A night of betrayal. The night was too quiet. Seraphina woke, with a start, a strange feeling twisting in her chest. Something was wrong. She pushed herself up, glancing toward Kai, who was still asleep beside the dying embers of their fire. And then, she heard it. The distant rustling. The heavy footsteps. The scent of iron in the air. Her stomach dropped. Hunters. Heart pounding, she grabbed Kai's shoulder, shaking him awake. Kai! She hissed. Wake up! His eyes snapped open, instantly alert. What? Then he heard it too. His expression darkened. No! Seraphina's mind raced. How had they found them? Unless... She turned to Kai, her breath shallow. Did you tell someone? His eyes widened. You think I? No! Seraphina, I would never. A voice cut through the darkness. There they are! Too late. The clearing exploded with movement as armed men burst from the shadows, torches in hand, swords gleaming. Kai shot to his feet, drawing his blade, but Seraphina had no such weapon. She only had her fire. Flames erupted from her fingertips, the heat blinding. The hunters stumbled back, startled. She's the dragon! One of them shouted. The word rang in the air like a death sentence. Seraphina turned to Kai, her eyes burning with betrayal. Run! His jaw tightened. Not without you. Go! She screamed. But he didn't move. Instead, he stepped in front of her. A hunter lunged, sword aimed for Seraphina's heart. And Kai blocked it. The clang of steel echoed through the night. Seraphina gasped. Kai! Stay behind me! He growled. The hunters circled them. The battle had begun. Draven's arrival. The battle had barely ended when a shadow fell over the clearing. The scent of burning embers filled the air. The ground trembled. Seraphina turned, and froze. Draven. His towering figure emerged from the trees, his armor glinting under the moonlight. His crimson eyes burned with fury as he took in the scene, the wounded hunters, Kai standing protectively in front of Seraphina, his sword raised. But it was Seraphina he fixed his gaze upon. You ran from me. His voice was low, but it carried enough weight to make the air feel heavier. Seraphina clenched her fists. I was never yours to keep. Draven's jaw tightened. You were promised to me. The future of our kind depends on our union. And yet... His gaze flickered to Kai. You throw yourself at a hunter? At the very enemy who slaughters our kind? Kai stepped forward, his grip on his sword firm. I never slaughtered anyone. Draven barely spared him a glance. You breathe the blood of dragons, hunter. Your existence alone is an insult. Kai didn't flinch. And yet here you are, speaking to me like a man instead of burning me alive. Seraphina shot Kai a warning look, but Draven only smiled. It was the most dangerous thing she had ever seen. You think you are safe, Seraphina? Draven said softly. Do you truly believe a hunter will stand beside you when he learns what you really are? Seraphina didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because at that moment, Draven struck. The air cracked like a whip as Draven lunged, claws extending from his hands. His nails, sharper than steel, slashed toward Kai's throat. Kai barely dodged, rolling to the side as Seraphina threw herself between them. Stop this! She shouted. Draven, you don't have to. But he wasn't listening. Draven swung his arm, knocking her aside like she was nothing. She hit the ground hard, gasping as pain exploded through her ribs. Kai! She choked out. Kai was already back on his feet, his sword raised. But Draven was faster. He struck like lightning, grabbing Kai by the throat and lifting him off the ground. You don't deserve to breathe the same air as her. Draven snarled. Kai struggled, his hands clawing at Draven's grip. Seraphina saw the life leaving his eyes. No. Something inside her snapped. She felt her blood ignite, her vision turning golden. Her body shifted. With a roar that split the night, Seraphina unleashed her true form. Flames erupted from her body as her wings unfurled, her skin melting into shimmering crimson scales. Her tail slammed into the earth, sending a shockwave through the clearing. Kai hit the ground as Draven released him, staggering back in shock. The hunters, those who had survived, froze. The dragons, Draven's warriors, waiting in the shadows, watched in awe. Seraphina stood before them all, no longer a woman but a dragon, her golden eyes burning with fury. A heartbeat of silence. Then, Kai! Draven sneered, turning to the stunned hunter. Still want to love her now? Kai stared up at her, his expression unreadable. Seraphina held her breath. Was he afraid? Would he turn his blade on her now? Kai met her gaze. His lips parted. Then, slowly, he smiled. Beautiful, he whispered. Seraphina's heart stopped. Draven's expression twisted into something dark. Fool! Then, he lifted his arms, and let out a deafening roar. The Solara clan emerged from the shadows, dozens of dragons, their eyes burning like wildfire. Draven's voice boomed. Burn the humans to ash! The sky erupted in fire. Flames over the village. Screams echoed as dragons took to the skies, their roars shaking the mountains. Fire rained down upon the village, engulfing homes in golden infernos. Seraphina felt her chest tighten as she saw the destruction begin. This wasn't what she wanted. Seraphina! Kai's voice cut through the chaos. He was on his feet, his sword in hand. She turned, her massive form towering over him. Kai! A dragon lunged at him. Seraphina struck. Her tail whipped through the air, sending the attacker crashing into a burning tree. Kai stared at her, breathless. You're protecting me? She met his gaze. Of course I am. For a split second, his face softened. Then, grim determination replaced it. We need to stop this, he said. Seraphina turned, her eyes finding Draven in the sky, his massive dragon form raining fire upon the humans below. She knew what she had to do. She spread her wings and launched herself toward him. The battlefield. The earth trembled beneath Seraphina's claws. The sky burned thick with smoke, the scent of charred wood and blood filling her lungs. Below her, Kai stood surrounded by hunters, their weapons glinting with dragon steel, sharp enough to kill her kind. Above her, Draven hovered midair, his massive wings beating against the wind, his crimson eyes locked onto her. Behind him, dozens of dragons awaited his command, ready to burn everything to ash. The war had begun. And Seraphina and Kai were trapped between both worlds. "End this, Seraphina," Draven called down. His voice was calm, but laced with venom. "Kill him. Prove your loyalty to your kind." Kai didn't move. He didn't plead. But from behind him, one of the hunters, the leader, spoke. "Kai, you know what needs to be done." Kai turned slightly, his shoulders stiff. "If you want to prove your blood is human, kill the dragon." Seraphina's chest tightened. They were both being asked to betray each other. A silence fell over the battlefield. The wind howled. The fire crackled. Kai spoke first. "I've made my choice." Then he threw down his sword. Gasps rippled through the hunters. Draven's eyes darkened. Seraphina's heart pounded. Kai stepped forward, closer to her massive dragon form. "Seraphina," he said, voice steady. "You don't have to fight for them. You don't have to fight for anyone. Just fight for us." Seraphina swallowed. Draven's growl shook the air. "Foolish girl. Look at him. He is nothing but prey. You think your love will change that?" She turned her head toward him. "I think love is stronger than this war." Draven let out a low, chilling laugh. "Then you are weak." He raised his clawed hand, flames swirling around his palm. "And weak dragons die." The fire exploded toward Kai. Seraphina moved without thinking. She lunged, wings beating hard, blocking the flames with her own body. Pain. Fire scorched her scales, but she didn't move. She wouldn't let it touch him. Kai reached for her, eyes wide. "Seraphina!" Draven snarled. "Pathetic." Seraphina raised her head. And roared. A shockwave blasted through the battlefield. The fire surrounding Seraphina's body shifted, no longer consuming, no longer burning. Instead it glowed. Brighter than the flames of destruction. Brighter than the war itself. It pulsed through her like a heartbeat. Draven's eyes narrowed. "What is this?" Seraphina felt it, something deep inside her, something ancient, something stronger than both humans and dragons. She turned to Kai. He was glowing too. His dragon blood reacting to her flames, to her soul. For the first time, Seraphina understood. They weren't just lovers from different worlds. They were something more. Together, they were balance. Draven realized it too. His rage turned to fear. "No!" he bellowed, diving toward them, claws outstretched. Seraphina and Kai unleashed their power. A blinding light erupted between them, surging outward, tearing through the battlefield. It engulfed the war, the dragons, the hunters, and wiped away the hate. When the light faded, the battlefield was silent. The dragons were motionless, staring at Seraphina and Kai in awe. The hunters had lowered their weapons, their anger replaced by something they didn't understand. And at the center of it all, Draven lay on the ground. His breath was shallow. His wings were torn. His power, gone. He lifted his head, staring at Seraphina with a mix of fury and disbelief. "You chose him," he rasped. Seraphina took a step forward, shifting back into her human form. "I chose love," she said softly. Draven let out a bitter laugh. His head fell back against the scorched earth. And for the first time, he closed his eyes. The war was over. The dragons who had followed Draven lowered their heads, their rage fading. The hunters, led by Kai, stepped back, no longer willing to fight. Seraphina and Kai stood side by side. A dragon and a hunter. Proof that love was stronger than hate. Kai turned to her. "What happens now?" Seraphina smiled. We rebuild. Together. He reached for her hand. She took it. And as the sun rose over the battlefield, washing away the darkness, they walked forward, toward a future they would create together.